Please remain standing for Scripture. We're in 2 Timothy 1, verses 3 to 7. It's on page 1141 of the Pew Bible. 2 Timothy 1, 3 to 7, on page 1141. God's Word is completely authoritative and sufficient. Let's look at it together. It says this: I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. As I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well. For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Please be seated. I grew up in a family of 13 people. That meant that I had a group of friends that I could hang out with every single day of the year. Now, there were siblings that we tended to gravitate towards more to hang out with, but all in all, we spent a lot of time together as a family. Every day, everyone who was around would eat breakfast and lunch together, but we would all make sure to be home to eat supper together every night, unless, of course, we had to work. Every day, we'd see each other. And on Saturdays, I bet parents would love this, on Saturdays, the whole family mobilized to clean the entire house from top to bottom. And my mom was a perfectionist, and so we had it perfect every single Saturday. Now, with such a large crew, it only took a couple hours to get that all done. We just picked a room and got it done, you know. But I always said that if we would start a family business, it would either be a moving company or a cleaning service. One thing we did that I'm eternally grateful for is that during the school year, we had a family Bible study every single weekday morning. Now, I'm not a morning person. I'm still not a morning person. And this was years before I discovered the wonderful nectar from heaven that is coffee. So this was tough for me to do. It's still tough for me to do even with coffee. But still, every morning we'd pray and we'd read the Bible. There wasn't really that much of an explanation of it. We'd basically just read. But in doing so, we were put in front of the Bible every single day, and we were praying every single day. And another thing that will stay with me my entire life is that on the days when we didn't have a Bible study, or when I randomly got up earlier than everyone else, I would come downstairs and I would see my dad or my mom or both sitting at the table with their cup of coffee, reading the Bible. That's the legacy that my parents have passed on to me. It's a legacy that I want to pass on to my children. Now, you know, the temptation when hearing this is to say, well, Jesse, that's because you're a pastor. But that's not it. Out of all of my brothers and sisters, I'm the only pastor. One is in the medical field. One is in human resources. One is a massage therapist. One is a life coach. One is in the Air Force. One is a stay-at-home mom. One is a banker, one works in a factory, one is an electrical engineer for semi-trucks, and one is in college. My dad is a postal worker, and my mom, while she works in the post office now, at the time, she was a stay-at-home mom. We were all ordinary people, living ordinary lives. We didn't have an extra calling on our lives, but we learned to take our faith seriously. Now, why did we learn that? What was the catalyst for this to happen? What should our faith lead to? Well, look at the passage again with me this morning. Verse 3 says this: I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. See, after Paul addresses and introduces his second letter to Timothy, he immediately moves into expressing his love for his disciples by thanking God for him. Now, Paul is in the midst of prison when he wrote this letter. This is the second time that he was taken to prison in Rome. And shortly after writing this letter, he will be executed for his faith in Christ. And Paul had a sense that this would happen, and so he told this to Timothy in chapter 4 of the same letter. Chapter 4, verses 6 to 7 says this, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." And so it is remarkable that we see Paul, that he does not express sorrow or regret right now. He begins his letter with thanksgiving for Timothy. But he doesn't thank Timothy, he thanks God. Notice that he connects his service to God to his ancestors in verse 3. His ancestors had passed on their faith to Paul, and Paul realized that there was a close connection of that faith with Christianity. And he saw his faith in Christ as a continuation of that faith from his ancestors. Even though he knew that the law of the Spirit superseded the law of Moses, he never spoke about the law of Moses with disrespect. He knew that God had worked through it to bring about his plan of salvation. And he knew that Jesus is the fulfillment of all of God's work in Israel. And so Paul shows that his condition before God, he says, is one of, a clear conscience. Even though he had sin, he did not have guilt. Why? Well, it's because Jesus took away Paul's guilt through forgiving his sin, through his substitutionary death on the cross. Paul wasn't defending his sin, he was highlighting the work of Christ. And it's from this place of thanksgiving, this place of heritage, and this place of freedom from guilt that Paul offers his prayers for Timothy. He says that he is constantly praying for Timothy. This gives the connotation of unceasing prayer. Paul continued to demonstrate throughout his walk with Christ that he was praying for the Christian community. Even though he was in prison, his thoughts were for his brothers and sisters in Christ. And just like Paul, we too need to be thankful and to be praying for the believers that we disciple. We need to lift them up in prayer over and over again. Parents, your primary discipling relationship is your children. You need to pray for them. You need to lift them up in prayer. Grandparents, your discipling relationships with your children extend to your grandchildren. Pray for them. And whether we have children or not, we should all be in discipling relationships with each other. And a primary aspect of that relationship will be prayer. It needs to be prayer. Jesus prayed for his disciples. Paul prayed for his discipling relationships. We need to pray for our discipling relationships. Look how close Paul and Timothy were. Look at verse 4. It says, "As I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy." See, one of Paul's memories was Timothy's tears for him the last time they met. We see this in Acts chapter 20, verses 36 to 38. It says this, "And when he," this is Paul, "and when he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. And there was much weeping on the part of all. They embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful most of all, because of the word he had spoken, that they would not see his face again. And they accompanied him to the ship." See, Paul remembered Timothy's tears, and he wanted to see his dear friend again. You know, this is the picture of a faithful believer's confidence before death and his loving attitude toward his disciple. This discipling relationship brought Paul joy. Be thankful for the opportunities to invest in other believers. That's our first point coming out of this passage for today. Be thankful for the opportunity to invest in other believers. You know, we have an amazing opportunity every single Sunday morning to come together and invest in each other's lives. But this doesn't have to happen on just Sundays. It can happen throughout the week. It can and should happen every day of the week. Every opportunity where we see each other, we should be supporting one another and encouraging one another. We could see each other at the pizza ranch or at the bank or in the store or just on the street. Whenever we see each other, we should be investing in each other's lives. God has brought us together so that we can help each other to learn more about Him and to keep each other walking in the narrow way. We should be thankful for that. We should be thankful when other people invest in us and when we can invest in other people. We should especially do this in our families, but this is also more than just in our own families. It's for every believer, even those outside of our church. Be thankful for the opportunity to invest in other believers. It's a gift from God for us. God is saying to us, here is one of my children. I need you to give them some encouragement. I need you to show them my grace and my mercy and my love. I need you to help them. It's a gift from God to us to help each other out. That's why we should be thankful to God for every opportunity. And God will work through that. How will He work through that? Well, look at verse 5. It was this verse that drew me to this passage for Mother's Day. It says this, I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well. See, the sincerity of Timothy's faith was apparent. But notice that his faith didn't start with him. It first belonged to his grandmother and then to his mother. Timothy's parents are first mentioned in Acts chapter 16, verse 1. It says this, Paul came also to Derbe and to Lystra. A disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. Now, notice back in Timothy that his dad wasn't mentioned in 2 Timothy. This is probably because his dad wasn't a Christian, but his mother and his grandmother were. And Paul points to them. Timothy not only had the benefit of Paul discipling him, he also had the gift of a godly mother and grandmother. They had made sure that Timothy was taught the Scriptures. And Paul references this again in this letter in 2 Timothy 3, 14 to 15. He says, But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it, and how, from childhood, you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. See, an application point for those of us who are parents, children are a gift, but with that gift comes responsibility. We need to place the Scriptures in front of our children on a daily basis, and they need to see us engaging the Bible on a regular basis. When it comes to our faith, we can never and should never say, do as I say, not as I do. We must, with integrity, live out the type of faith that we know we should have and that we would want them to have. Now, we can never guarantee that our children will place their faith in Christ or that they would take their faith seriously as they get older. But our actions can make it easier or more difficult for those things to occur. The question is that we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be an example to learn about what to do? Or do we want to be a lesson of what not to do? From Timothy's mother and grandmother, he had a good example to follow that gave him a solid foundation for his faith and that God continued to grow throughout his life. Both parents and spiritual parents should pass down their faith. And the legacy of a sincere faith should cause those of us who receive it to grow it, to serve through it, and to pass it down to others. Look at verse 6. It says this, For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Now, the gift that Paul is talking about here is more than just natural ability. It's a gift of the Spirit. We don't know what the gift that he's referring to is. He doesn't name it. But because it was received through the laying on of hands, it probably refers to something ministry related. But Paul is reminding Timothy here that God equips people to help the body grow by giving them gifts through the Spirit. But he also reminds him that this gift isn't going to just develop itself, or that if Timothy just waits around that it'll help the body grow. No, he told him to fan it into flame. Now this phrase, fan it into flame, comes from a Greek word that means to kindle afresh and to stir up the fire. You know, I've started a few campfires in my day, and getting a fire going usually takes work, effort, and intentionality. This is what Paul was telling Timothy to do. He needs to develop his gift so that he can use it to help others grow. Because of the legacy of Timothy's faith, Paul is encouraging him to live that faith out in front of others. He doesn't need a new gift for this. He has all that he needs. He just has to rekindle it. That instruction is the same one for us. Because of the faith that has been passed down to us, we should serve with the gifting that's been given to us so that we can pass down our faith to others. Our faith is a living testimony to those who taught us. It's our second point for today. Our faith is a living testimony to those who taught us. Not just one person, not just two people, but to everyone who has invested in our lives. In my own life, my parents, my siblings, my pastors, Sunday school teachers, VBS teachers, friends, camp counselors, church members, church leaders, and more have helped shape my faith with their words of wisdom and their words of guidance and their words of direction when they've had to correct me, when they've encouraged me. You know, sometimes we may not understand the investment that is being made in the moment, only to look back on it later and to recognize that it was how helpful it was. And at other times, we may know right away that God has brought that person into our lives at that right time to speak into our situations. But through it all, God will be working to grow us, to mature us, to make us look more like Christ. Our faith is a living testimony to those who taught us. We are the legacy of everyone before us. You know, someone invested in someone's life, who invested in someone else's life, who invested in someone else's life, who invested in someone else's life, and so on all the way back to the original disciples to today. We have 2,000 years of God working through people from the original disciples to us being right here, right now, today. God has worked through others to bring us to this point in time. And He has entrusted us with this work to pass it on to the next generation. Do we understand that we will be a part of someone else's living faith? Do we understand the opportunity that we have and the responsibility that it is, and that we need to take it seriously? And if so, what should we do? Look at our final verse for today. Verse 7. It says this: "For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." See, Paul contrasts fear with power, love, and self-control. And rightfully so. If we live in a state of fear, the characteristics that will define us is timidity, selfishness, and weakness. But Paul is saying that the fear of the world doesn't come from God. What comes from God is a spirit of power and of love and of self-control. Power in this context refers to the strength of character a Christian has and the boldness that he or she has to live that out before others. Love is the self-sacrificing, never giving up, humble love that God revealed to us through Christ. This love is to be shown to God and to others. True Christian love enables us to sacrifice for others and to not be afraid. And self-control is the fruit of the Spirit. It refers to the self-discipline that we have over our lives. This word, the same word for self-control, is sometimes translated as sound mind. And it describes a person who has wisdom and discernment and exercises both in their life. We don't know what Timothy feared. But we should take comfort to know that the one who gave him this instruction, Paul, he also had fear. Paul had faced fear when he planted the church in Corinth. In Acts chapter 18, verses 9 to 10, it says this. And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people." See, Paul is told to fight fear with the knowledge and promise that God was with him, that God would protect him, and that Paul would be used to bring people into God's kingdom. And now in 2 Timothy, Paul is sharing that same source of hope with Timothy. See, even Paul experienced fear, and really, who hasn't? As we engage in discipling and evangelism and serving and parenting or anything else for God, fear will be there seeking to stop us from whatever we're trying to do. We're not alone in that. And so we need to fight fear with the promises of God. We need to help each other to overcome that fear. God gave us a spirit of power, love, and self-control. He gives it to us so that we can share it with others. Not just unbelievers through evangelism, but with other believers through discipleship, and with our children as well. Mothers and spiritual mothers, if there's an encouragement that I can give you specifically this morning, it is to know that God has gifted you so that you can empower, show love, and teach self-control to your children. Do this so that they can one day show it to others. Don't fear the things that your child will face in this lifetime. Often we can do that. We can look at how the world is going today, and we can begin to fear for the next generation that is being raised in it. But I want you to realize that God has put them on this earth for this moment in time. And the adversity that they may face will be dwarfed by the advancements they make for the kingdom of God. We must boldly share our faith in Christ. That's our third point for today. We must boldly share our faith in Christ. This is the call on our lives. What we know, we must share. We must share it because it was shared with us. Just as our faith is a living example or a living testimony to those who have invested in us and who have taught us, so too will we be a part of someone else's living faith. And how do we want to be a part of their faith? Do we want to be an example of fear? Or do we want to model being timid? Essentially, do we want to be an example of what to do or what not to do? Or would we rather echo Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1, when he says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ"? Right now, each of us is in a room with 100+ other people. That's 100+ other people that we are currently witnessing to in this moment, and that we will witness to after the service and throughout our lives. What will our witness be to each other? What will our investment be in each other's lives? We must boldly share our faith in Christ. That's the type of legacy we want to leave with others. And if we want to leave a solid legacy for those around us, if we want to be a help to someone's faith and not hinder it, then we must do two things. First, we must be solid in the gospel. We must believe that Jesus came to earth, that he lived a perfect life, and that he died on the cross to defeat the power of sin. We couldn't do that ourselves, but he did it for us. And then 3 days later, he rose again, defeating death. Now, if we confess that Jesus is Lord, if we believe in him, we will be saved. Our sins will be forgiven, we will have eternal life, and we will join him on mission to help others to come to know him and to grow in their faith. That is the gospel, and that's the first thing that we need to believe and put into practice. The second thing we must do is to engage God's word and to pray. We must hear from God through his word, and we must talk to God through prayer. In other words, we need to take responsibility for our own faith so that we can help grow it in others. Those are the two foundational things. We probably all know this by now. Be solid in the gospel and engage in a devotional time with God through reading the Bible and prayer. It's nothing new. But these two things will help us grow in our faith. And what should our faith look like? What should it lead to? It should lead to sharing it with others and cultivating it in others. Inward faith leads to outward growth. It's our big idea for today. Inward faith leads to outward growth. A faith that stays private will eventually shrivel up and will be of no use to ourselves or to anyone else. We need to cultivate our own faith so that we can personally grow and so that we can help others to grow in it as well. Inward faith leads to outward growth. Now, today is Mother's Day, and I chose this passage because earlier we saw the faith and investment of two mothers. Timothy's grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice invested in him before Paul ever did. Mothers, you, and along with dads, will invest in your children before anyone else ever will. But I want you all to understand that whether or not you are a parent, you have the opportunity and responsibility to be spiritual parents. You have the opportunity and responsibility to invest in other people's lives. Those believers who are around us, who are growing their faith in Christ and learning about Him. We can all be spiritual parents. Paul often called Timothy his son, even though they had no blood relation. And I hope we realize this point, that whether we want to or not, we are already investing in other people's faith. We just need to be intentional with how we do it. Be the example for someone else. Have a faith that is worth imitating. Have a faith that invests in others. Inward faith leads to outward growth. Now, I've stated how to apply this throughout the sermon, so allow me just to state it one more time. Believe and practice the gospel. Read the Bible and pray. Invest in other people's faith. And realize you are already witnessing. God is good, and He will work through our efforts. He will work through us to pass our faith to other people. So let's trust in Him, and let's work to His glory. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank You for Your word and for Your instruction to us. We thank You for the example of Paul and of Timothy. I pray, Lord, that You would work in us, work in our hearts and in our minds and our spirits, Lord, to grow our faith in You, to be bold in our faith, to take seriously our witness and our investment in other people. We thank You for how people have worked in our lives and how You've worked through them, Lord, to grow us to this point and to have us be here even. We thank You for Your work. We thank You for the people who have invested in our lives. And we pray, Lord, that we can be a good example for others, that we can pass on this faith to others. Give us this boldness, Lord. Give us the fire to do this, the passion to do this, and the opportunities to pass on our faith. It's in Your name we pray. Amen.